Welcome everyone back to the Body Pod. I am so excited today to have our guest, Dr. Gina Cleo, on to talk about all things habits. She is the author of The Habit Revolution, helping you to rewire your brain for powerful habit change. She also has a PhD in habits, which I want to dive into because I think that's the best PhD you can have.
Seriously.
So welcome, Gina. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be chatting with you.
Yes, we are so excited. So, Dr. Cleo, can you go ahead and just give us a little rundown about, anything more that our audience needs to know about you or what you do?
Well, I started my career as a dietitian, actually, and I was just fascinated with the idea of creating sustainable change because I
Mhm.
found not only my clients were struggling to change their behaviors long term, but I was struggling with my own disordered eating. And I was like, just eating too much and then trying to restrict. And I just didn't have a very healthy relationship with food, but I was frustrated that I didn't have enough self control or willpower. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And so, this
Mm.
idea of actually doing what I say I'm going to do, like saying I'm going to get up and do a workout and actually doing it rather than scrolling on Facebook Marketplace for 2 hours,
Yeah.
became something that I was just fascinated with, which is why I went into research and did my PhD in habits. And honestly, I mean, the research shows that changing our habits is the only proven method to long term success. And I can testify to that not only from my own life, but from the thousands of people that I've worked with.
Yes, and I have to just interject really quickly because I work with women 40 plus, or sometimes in the 30s if they get in. But I mean, all of this, I do fat loss and nutrition and you know fitness courses, and we have a behavior and habit change clinical psychologist on our staff, and so we go through this, you know, as part of it, but it's almost like people want the shiny, fun workouts and they want all the education, and all of this. And I'm like, you guys, if you don't change the habit, then
Yeah.
in, you know, 6 months, 8 months, you're back to exactly where you started. So this is such powerful information. That's why I'm just so excited to dig into this book. The last amazing book I read was Atomic Habits, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So
Yeah.
your book, The Habit Revolution, I have been just devouring and I love because I feel like it's the best book since I have read like Atomic Habits. So I
Mhm.
really love it in there and I just think it's so powerful. So
Thank
can
you.
you kind of lead us into what the difference is between a habit and a behavior?
Yeah, so we often use these words interchangeably. We also use words like routine or ritual interchangeably with habits and behaviors, but they're very different things. So, a habit is an automatic action or thought or belief that we do subconsciously and automatically. And it's triggered by something in our environment. It could be our internal environment, like how we're feeling, or it could be our external environment, like the time of day or the place that we're in or who we're around. Habits are, because they're subconscious, they mostly happen very efficiently and mindlessly. They're things like when you sit in the car and you put your seatbelt on, or when you get home from work, do you do a workout or do you have a glass of wine? Whatever you do automatically, they are your habits. Habits make up to 70% of everything we do, think, and believe every single day. Behaviors, on the other hand, are intentional, they're deliberate. They're the choices we make, like how do I get from A to B, or how should I conduct myself in this meeting, or what should I wear today? Those are intentions. Behaviors require effort because they use mental resources. Our brain's working. Whereas with habits, it's actually in a different part of our brain and it happens very efficiently.
Oh, I
I love
love
how
that.
you say in the book, habits tell a story about our life.
Mm,
That was so interesting when I read that, and it's so true.
mm,
So
yeah. Yeah, they
Yes, if
almost
we
like
don't
they
like our
shape.
life.
Yeah, because I mean, they shape part of our identity. They become our
Yeah.
lifestyle. Like, for example, I go to Pilates in the mornings. So I'm an active person because my habits lend to that. Or, someone who might be like a bit outgoing in their character or their temperament, we might call them an extrovert. That becomes part of their identity. But it's
Mm.
actually their behavior that's repeated that gives them that label. So our habits do tell a story of our life. And I think it's really interesting. I've been through different phases of my life. I went through a really horrible breakup with my ex, and I've had, disordered eating, like I was saying, and I'm now in a much healthier space. And I can see how the habits that I've chosen months, weeks or months ago, are now shaping my reality. And it's almost like the different chapters of our lives are dictated by the habits that we cultivate.
It's
Oh
so
my god.
true and powerful when you really think about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love at the very first within the first couple of chapters that you say that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
Because
It's
if I'm feeling
true. Our brain just like repeats the things that we teach it to. So if you say you're playing the guitar and you're doing it all wrong and you keep doing it like that, you're going to learn it wrong. You're going to be really good at doing it wrong.
yes.
Such a good point.
Oh, so where would you say if we know the difference between a behavior and a habit. So when we talk about the, characteristics of a habit, and there's 3
Mm.
characteristics, right, that make up the habit
Yes.
we talk about.
Yes.
Can we
Yes.
dive into those and how those work together?
Yeah, absolutely. This is like a pop quiz for me now. I'm going to bring up my book and
You're on
remember
the
what I wrote. No, I think one of them is automaticity. Am I right? You're going to have to tell me this. Yeah, it's the history of, so there's a history of repetition, there's a high degree of automaticity, and they're triggered by a context. So a high degree of repetition, every habit that we have is there because it's been repeated, and our brain then learns it, and our brain goes, well, I want to preserve energy, I don't need to consciously think about this anymore because I'm obviously repeating it, so I'm going to put it in that automated part of our brain. There's a real nuance here that I'd love to touch on, and there's a difference between repetition and frequency. You actually don't have to repeat a habit a lot for it to become habitual. If you think of people, and I write this example in the book, people that might go to church just at Christmas time, and they do that a couple of years in a row. The third year comes around and it's Christmas time, they're automatically going to like get the urge to go to church because now it's become this repeated routine. Even though
Mm,
it only happens once a year, it's still
yeah.
a habit. So it's about repetition. The high degree of automaticity. So, automaticity is such a weird, fancy word, but it's basically that feeling that you get when something's really efficient and it's fluent. You don't have to
Mhm.
think about doing it anymore. If you remember the first time you learned to tie your shoelace, if you can remember, like as a little girl, you were probably using every single brain cell to learn how to tie your shoelace. And now you do it without even thinking about. That is a state of automaticity, that fluency of our behavior is a key characteristic. When we know a habit is a habit and not a behavior, it's when we're in a state of automaticity with it. And then finally, all our habits are triggered by something. And I was saying before, either internal or external environments. And that is one of the key differences between habits and behaviors. Behaviors can happen spontaneously. I can think right now, I'm going to pick up this book or I'm going to pick up a pen, and it's just something that I've decided to do. Whereas habits are triggered. So, for example, if you wake up and the first thing you do is check your phone, waking up is the trigger to you checking your phone. When you sit in the car and put your seatbelt on, sitting in the car is the trigger that prompts you to put your seatbelt on. Every single habit we have, both good and otherwise, are triggered by something.
So there's different, I guess the automaticity, maybe that's it, but some of them like that's the unconscious habit where you're not even really thinking about it, you're just doing it because this is what you've always done.
Yeah, exactly. It just happens. Like when you see the trigger, when you're exposed to the trigger, you just do the automatic action and it happens in a split second. There's a really great quote in neuroscience and it's neurons that fire together wire together. And that's exactly what happens when you do two things at once or in concession or succession. When you do them together, they link together. So then, as soon as one of those neurons is fired, the second one fires. And that's that trigger habit firing together.
Okay, so and this is the $1,000,000 question that
Yeah.
everyone wants to know is how like, so if we have these we all have good habits that we're proud of, and then we have
Hmm.
bad habits that we're like, "Oh, I don't wanna do this anymore. I'm not happy, I'm not
Hmm.
proud of this one."
Yeah.
So, the good habits we wanna keep, but how do we even start with breaking an old habit, and how long does it take?
There are two proven methods to breaking unwanted habits. And the very first step in breaking habits is actually identifying the trigger. So, when you do your unwanted habit, say you're snacking when you're not hungry, which is a really common unwanted habit, you want
Yes.
to be able to inject some mindfulness and just think to yourself and have a reflection. Where am I? What time of day is it? What am I feeling? Who am I around? And what have I just done beforehand? Those are those five key habit triggers. And
Mhm.
once we can identify the trigger, we can then try to preempt it because what I was saying before, like the trigger habit happen automatically. And this is
Mm.
where we often go wrong when we want to change a habit. We're like, we get triggered and then we're like, nope, those cookies are dead to me. I'm going to be good and I'm a strong, independent, successful woman and I won't be defeated by the carbohydrates. But as soon as that trigger's fired, our brain, our entire physiology moves us towards doing the sequence of of that trigger habit response. And so as soon as we're triggered, our body just wants us to go and grab that snack, even if we're not hungry, even if we've told ourselves we're not going to do it, which is why advice like just don't eat the cookie doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just don't eat when you're not hungry. It doesn't work because your brain's already been triggered and trying to do anything else feels insanely uncomfortable. You know that we've all been through it, the mind battle, the logic versus emotion, the mind that goes, I really don't need to eat because I'm not hungry, and the emotions that's like, girl, just go grab the cookie and then this mind chatter will stop.
Yeah.
It's that happens, and that's because our brain's like, this is what we normally do, so we have to just do this, otherwise I don't know what to do now. So to break a habit, the last thing we want to do is wait till we're triggered and then try to battle that. It's really difficult. Our brain's not wired to do that. So we want to
Yeah.
be able to preempt the trigger. So for me, for example, one of my triggers when I'd non-hungry eat was getting home after like a day of work. Get home, drop my bag down, and then I'd go straight into the pantry and find whatever sugary, carby thing I could. And
Mhm.
so I identified that getting home was my trigger. And through the preempting, I would say to myself on my way home, so before I got home, all right, Gina, as soon as you walk through that door, you're going to want to go grab like a biscuit. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go, instead of going to the kitchen, I'm going to go into my bedroom. I'm going to have a shower. I'm going to do maybe a 5-minute meditation. I'm going to sit in my room for maybe 5 minutes and then I'm going to walk out. And what that does is it disrupts the cue routine response and
Mm.
it creates space for mindfulness because now we haven't fired the first neuron. So the second neuron isn't being fired either.
Which is
Okay.
where it compounds it and makes it more powerful, right? So you're disrupting it
Yeah.
and creating something new. That is so interesting.
The second way that you can break a habit, and this is only when possible, and it's easier to do it this way, is if you can avoid the trigger, freaking avoid it. Like I
Yeah.
worked with someone who would go into a fast food chain on their way home from work every day. And he really struggled, as soon as he'd see the fast food chain, he'd just drive straight in. He really, really tried not to. And I was like, hey, can you just drive a different way home? And he
Yeah.
did. And then the habit dropped. And a week later, he called me and he was like, I completely forgot why we were even working together because that habit's no longer there. So if you can avoid the trigger, do it.
Wow. So
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's changed 1 week.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Because if we're not exposed to if we don't have triggers, we don't have habits. So if you get rid of that trigger, your habit will drop automatically.
there's the $1,000,000 answer right.
Oh, seriously?
I mean,
You're
because that's like when I like, for someone that struggles with, I don't know, junk food, and they no
Mm,
longer have children at home, which it makes it harder when you have kids that have, like, some of these foods around. But just,
yeah,
like, having it out of the house, it's like out of
yeah,
sight, out of mind.
yeah,
Um,
completely.
wow, and I love the mindfulness when you say, like, stop. So, stop and think about it and save some space to be like,
Yeah,
"Okay, well, what do I really want?" Have a second to reflect before you're just kind of subconsciously like, again, I'll use food as an example because this is the questions that I get asked all the time, but it's almost like this hand mouth gap where it's subconscious and people don't even realize that they
mm,
just ate 10 Cheez-Its while they were cleaning up their kid's plate.
yeah.
Um, but they don't even account, like, they don't even remember they ate it because it's just such a habit of like, this is I don't want food to go to waste while I'm cleaning up my kid's plate or whatever it
Yeah,
be.
yeah. That's exactly what happens. Yeah, we're just so mindless with it. I remember being like halfway through a packet of crisps when I was like, how did this happen? I literally had to walk to the pantry, get the packet, open it, come sit down, and I'm halfway through it. And all of this happened completely mindlessly. And that just shows how important mindfulness is. And it just slows everything down. Mindfulness actually brings us into our prefrontal cortex, which is where behaviors lie, whereas our emotional brain holds our habits. So when we're in a state of mindlessness, we're much more likely to just do these automatic behaviors that we're not conscious of. You asked
Mhm.
before as well how long it takes to break a habit.
Yes.
There is a really wide spectrum with this, and there's no definitive answer, which I hate. I really like to know numbers and then I can count down. But for some people, they can break their habits overnight. Now, I worked with someone who was nail biting, and overnight, he broke that habit. For
how?
other,
By the
because
mindfulness? By the trigger?
yeah. Yeah, he really wanted it. He really, really wanted it. He realized that biting his nails didn't align with his values. So he started to feel this cognitive dissonance where he was doing something and his values were different to that. And then he started to feel uncomfortable in that space because that's what happens when we become mindful of those behaviors. And he was ready. He was like, I have no reason to do this anymore. It's not serving me, and he just broke it. So when he realized his triggers, he was able to implement strategies to completely stop doing that. Other people and other habits, it's going to take a bit longer. And that's
Mhm.
going to depend on your environment. Like, how conducive is your environment to breaking that habit? If you're trying to stop non hungry eating, do you have all your snacky foods around the house? Are they sitting on your desk easy to grab? That's going to make it harder and it's going to take longer. Also, the less you do the habit, the quicker you break it. So if you're like sort of just dabbling with the idea of breaking it and not like going full steam ahead, then it's going to take a bit longer to break it than if you've really committed to the plan.
I love how the Aussies call it crisps.
Oh,
Crisps, I actually call it chips, but I think that I've done so many pods in like UK and they were like, what are like chips, like chips? I'm like, oh, I don't know what to call it now.
It's
What do you
adorable.
guys call it? Chips?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Chip?
and then you call French fries French fries.
Fries.
yep,
Yeah.
Fries. See, because we call both chips, and then you're like, you don't know what one it is. It's a
yep.
Oh,
Kinder Surprise.
I love the Aussies. I mean, we both
Yes.
love the Aussies.
We both have deep
Oh,
love for Australia, yes.
oh, yay! Come visit.
Oh,
So, tell
we will.
me this. Oh, yes, it's my favorite place. Um, what between okay, if we're talking about a habit and an addiction, where's that
Hmm.
Ask that,
different?
yeah, the difference between that.
Yeah, so they do, habits and addictions share similar characteristics, but they're not the same. Habits, yes, they're things we do automatically. Yes, they can be destructive to our lives if they're unwanted habits and they're negatively impacting us. And they do give us a reward. So those are all characteristics that are also in an addiction. The difference, though, is that addictions generally completely destroy our lives. They are really hard to control. So we feel completely powerless with addictions. But the biggest difference is in the reward. So every habit gives us a reward. That's why we do it again. It could be a hit of dopamine. It could be comfort in the familiarity. It could be efficiency. Like it could be heaps of different things. Whereas in addictions, that reward that we get is huge. It's this huge hit of dopamine and it hijacks our reward system to the point that our brain tells us if we don't keep getting this substance or this behavior, we're going to go into shutdown mode, and it gets into almost this fight or flight mode in our bodies. And it feels like we need this thing for survival. And because the reward is so high, now our body's like, well, nothing else is going to make me feel quite as good. And so I need this to feel good. Like when
Mhm.
you eat chocolate, for example, it'll increase your dopamine double. It'll double your dopamine levels. If you do crack cocaine, it's going to be 10 times at least. It's going to increase your dopamine. Don't do drugs. But what happens is when you have that huge hit of dopamine, nothing else in nature is going to make you feel that good. And that's why you want it again and again and again.
Okay, so with like food, there's a spectrum of where someone
Mm,
feel like it's an addiction, but
yeah.
it's kind of just a very, very strong unhealthy habit.
Yeah, I mean there is such a thing as food addiction, but I think for most people, eating food is a coping mechanism. You know, eating when we're not hungry or feeling that out of control with food is a coping mechanism. And it can still be a mental health issue. You know, we like binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder, especially in the Western world.
Yeah.
And that is a mental health problem. And it can actually be medicated through impulse control, um, suppressing medications.
It's
Wow.
so interesting because a lot of it too with unhealthy habits is just like the especially I have an Aussie friend that lives here that says that America is just the land of convenience.
Yeah.
Everything is convenient, anywhere you go. Like, no we're not no one's starving,
Mhm.
we have access to all of these cheap fast foods, and so
Mm.
there's all of these, like, things that make it harder for our habits to be really healthy habits because we just have access to anything we want at all the time, and of course, I would rather be having amazing carrot cake all the time if I could.
Yeah,
It was a
absolutely.
healthy habit.
Yeah, there's no doubt we live in an obesogenic world where we are constantly bombarded with temptation.
Mhm.
And I don't like being all or nothing with anything. You know, I love the idea of balance and moderation and never feeling that you can't have something in your house. But I can
Yeah,
also tell you that the more sugar I eat, the more I want. And the more French fries I eat, the more I want. And so for
Absolutely.
me, it's actually better to just go, that's just not something that I eat. And now I don't really like it as much. And and I feel so much better when I eat these other foods anyway. And it's just this very value aligned decision. And then that becomes your habits with time.
Do you believe in journaling? Do you think
I
that helps?
do. Yeah, I do because the evidence shows that it's like awesome. But I personally don't like journaling because I'm like, I'll sit there and journal and be like, it's weird talking to myself and I don't really know what to say. And I get like real awkward about it. But what I do from time to time, which I find really valuable, is journaling my food diary for the day, just to
Yeah,
bring mindfulness again into, how much I'm eating or what I'm eating. And it's a completely non-judgmental activity. It's just to increase my mindfulness.
yeah. I love how you say we attract what we focus on.
Yes.
I mean,
Ooh,
that's a really powerful statement too.
yeah. And this is different to the idea of, manifestation or like drawing things in like that. The idea of this is actually a lot more scientific in that there's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system or the RAS. And we are we are consuming actually millions of pieces of information at any one time. Our
Mm.
brain, like our eyes, for every second, see enough information to be reading 500 pages of information in just 1 second. Our skin has 4 million receptors that are giving us information constantly about temperature, pressure, pain, textures. We can hear someone yelling from 100 meters away. So this all this information that our brain is constantly getting, there's no way that we can consciously process all of that. So this part of our brain, the RAS, it's created like a filter, and we train it by telling it what's important to us by the things we pay attention to. And so those are the things that it focuses on. And all the other information that we're getting just becomes background. Like we don't even notice that it's there. Like outside my window right now, there's birds, the swimming pools out there, and there's like a little flamingo thing floating around in it, like a floating flamingo. There's all this like context going on that I'm not focusing on, but I know is there. And that's
Yeah.
because my RAS is primed to focus on my current task at hand, which is speaking to you guys. So that's when we focus on something, we're going to notice it more. And it happens even with our self talk. And that's probably where it's most pertinent. When we say to ourselves, I'm a failure, or I have no control over my eating, or I'm too lazy to exercise, or whatever the self talk we have, we're going to notice it more. And then every time we miss a workout, or every time we eat something that we didn't want to be eating, our brain's like, see, I told you, you are lazy, or you are like, you do lack self control. So the more we focus on the positives in our own life, the more we're going to see it and then be it.
I love that. So it's kind of like confirmation bias a little bit. Like
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
what
exactly
you
right.
hear and what you'll notice things more when you're
Yeah,
mindful and paying attention to it. Oh,
It's
exactly
even
right.
like when you say you're tired, when you are tired
Mm,
all day, like, I am so tired, I'm so exhausted. But if you say, I didn't get much rest, but today's going to be a great day, I'm going to feel
yeah,
energized, I'm going to get through this slump. I mean, even immediately when you start saying things like that, I feel like it
mm,
does change how you feel inside. So I
it
always am trying
absolutely
to be
does.
aware of those things. But it's
Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk about the habit loop, the 3 things, the cue, trigger, the routine, and the reward. So can you walk us through just an example of, like, someone that wants to break, say, the habit of snacking? We brought that up a little bit,
Mm.
or something similar to that.
Yeah. So the cue, routine, the reward, the habit loop is the ingredients that are found in every single habit. And the cue, like we said, is the trigger, the routine, that's the habit itself, and the reward, that's the benefit we get from the habit. And that's why our brain's like, oh, this is cool. We should repeat this again. So let's
yeah.
say snacking when we're not hungry. The trigger is often something like boredom or a negative emotion like anxiety, or let's say it's boredom for the
Mhm.
example. So boredom's the trigger, the routine is non-hungry snacking, and the reward that we get from that is distraction from our boredom. It's suppressing an uncomfortable emotion in the moment. To rewire that, it's exactly like I was saying with getting home. It's noticing, okay, I'm bored and I've got this urge to eat, and then having something in place that you can do instead. Like have it already ready, whether it's a new hobby or walk outside or just change your environment somehow. Don't stand in front of the pantry and be like, I'm bored, but I'm not going to eat anything. Really shift your environment.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of, that habit loop. And the same way with creating habits, choose a trigger, I mean, a time of day or a place or an emotion, and then have that habit like ready in place. So for me, it's like, 6 a.m., I go to Pilates. So when my alarm goes off, I get dressed and I go, and I don't even think about the process anymore. It's just what I do automatically. And that's
Mhm.
because I've created that habit loop for that habit.
So do you recommend maybe, like, for those of us that are like, "Well, I have 3 habits I wanna change right now." Do you just focus on 1? Like, is it best to just focus on 1 and master that, or can you take on more than 1 habit change at a time?
Great question. Our brain's only capable of making up to 3 changes at one time, but the research shows that if we just focus on one habit change at a time, we're much more likely to achieve it and actually maintain that change long term compared to if we're shifting focus to do a few different things at a time. So it's really hard, especially for the high achievers or the all or nothing thinkers, to be like, I'm just going to do one thing. It feels so slow and inefficient. But if we can trust the process and know that this is how our brain works the best, and actually long term, this is going to create a much better outcome, we're going to be, we'll win if we do that. So just one habit change at a time is what I'd recommend.
And what about creating habits? Is that the same thing
Same,
for you?
same.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
I to go back to I know this doesn't have to do with weight loss, but the biting your nails.
Mm,
Are there certain things like some people will do it when they're talking to someone, or some people will do it when they're driving in the car, or something like that? So, to create the change to get it to stop and break the habit, doing something like wearing gloves, or is that why they created things like you put something that tastes bad on little kids' nails that are doing it? Does that try to disrupt those
mm.
neurons? Is that the whole process behind that? So, because what if
That's
someone
exactly
doesn't
it.
know why they're
Yeah.
biting their nails?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the hard part,
Oh,
sometimes our triggers are just the comfort and the familiarity. It's like this feels familiar. Our brain loves familiarity and it just feels good to do something that I'm used to. And that's all it is. And yes, that's why having those prompts and the props are really helpful. Doing something like wearing gloves or the nail polish really helps. I know for women they'll like to, or men, but women especially like to get a manicure and make their nails look really nice, and that way they don't want to bite them. So that's really part of creating that environment that's going to help you create a new habit. If you don't want to be drinking wine at night, put your wine in a really inconvenient place, like top shelf in the garage where you've got to get a step ladder to go get it, or just don't have it in the house. And those barriers are a total game changer for breaking habits because our brain loves the path of least resistance. And if
yes.
something takes effort, firstly, it's a deterrent. But secondly, it creates enough space for us to be mindful, to be like, I can go get the wine, but do I really want to do that? Now I can't just impulsively grab it. I have to actually think about getting it.
Ugh.
That's so true. I've been thinking a lot about good habits and bad habits lately. So I feel like this podcast came at such a beautiful time. And one of the things that I felt like I loved that you said in the book and is how living your life by design instead of
Mm.
default. And I just got full body chills when I was reading that. And then
Oh,
when you brought up the nail biter that you helped change, that he said, this does not align with my values. That's one of the
yeah.
things I'm really getting out of this book that I think is fascinating is, yeah, we do things and let our habits lead our life that, our good habits, obviously we want, but
Mm.
how to be mindful and actually really create our life instead of
Yeah.
letting our habits lead. I don't know. It was so powerful.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree, I have had this life transformation where I looked at some of my habits and I'm like, why do I do this? This doesn't align with me. It doesn't serve me. Just because
Yeah.
it's a social norm or whatever it is, I don't actually want to do it. And I created this life by design and it's unconventional and I love it. I love every moment of it because it's exactly, it aligns with my values and that's a beautiful place to be. And we can all do it. We all have the power to completely reshape our habits and rewire our brains.
Does it help to have someone, like, on your team? Meaning, like, to help you if you're trying to do a new habit? Does it help to have, people in your household get on board with this? If
Mm,
it's important to you to not have the junk food in, then maybe they're like, "Okay, well, I can go without this until it's not a trigger for you anymore." Does that play
mm.
into it?
Yeah, I mean, having that supportive environment is so important. Accountability can double our chances of success. The
Oh,
caveat here is, changing our habits is a process of two steps forward, one step back. And let's say, for example, you've said to yourself, all right, I'm not going to non hungry snack or I'm not going to snack in the afternoons. And that's just a new habit that I want to create. And
mhm.
then say you've done this for a couple of weeks and you've actually scheduled in a time where you can just splurge out and have whatever snack you want. But if the people in your corner aren't aware of that process, it might feel like you're being like judged or criticized, or you know what I'm saying? Whereas actually that's part of the plan. Like that step back, if we want to call it that, is actually part of the change process. So
Mm.
the person that's being accountable to you needs to be on board with this.
Mhm.
Instead of
Okay.
it being backfire, yeah.
This
Mm,
is amazing because, again, I mean, this is just my world. I'm running a group right now. We're 3 weeks in, and there are people, there's always a big range in a group of this size,
mm.
of different levels, and it's never, and I'm trying to just be like, it's never all the way forward,
Yeah,
ever.
linear. Mm,
Never linear. I mean, weight loss isn't linear, change isn't linear, and so knowing and kind of expecting, like, instead of just the all or nothing, "You know what? I screwed
yeah.
up. I'm waiting until next week. I'm waiting
Yes.
until whatever to, like,
Monday.
start this again," because 'cause I'm just like, "Well, today's screwed, so I'm just gonna keep eating everything," or whatever it is, and then it's just like this perpetual cycle of never getting ahead.
Yes, it's so true. And one of the ways that, I've lost 15 kilograms myself, it's people often, presume that I've always just lived in a healthy body, but I haven't. When I had my disordered eating, I definitely was carrying excess weight and I was unhappy with my body. And the biggest mind shift that I would say really contributed to my success is
Mhm.
the getting rid of all or nothing thinking. Is when I have, a splurge, instead of waiting for the next day and binging out the rest of that day, is picking myself up in that moment and saying, okay, the next meal can be different. The next minute can be different. And every
Yeah.
moment we have a choice. And I would choose, the forward steps in that moment. And that's actually the difference between people who succeed and people that fall off the wagon entirely. It's how quickly you get back up and how consistently you get back up again.
That right there.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, I wish it were, and it's not always that easy. We have to go through these
Mm,
conversations a lot, but it really is, it's amazing, especially women. I feel like we put so much, like, we take on so much. Everyone. We take on everyone's issues, we take on our children's issues, our, work issues, our spouse's issues. I mean, we carry a lot of load, and
mm.
it's so easy to just be like, "Well, I suck at this." Like, this is why, and again, the brain saying like, "Well, this is why you're never gonna,
Yeah,
change this
that's
habit
right.
because you've just, biased it again," and you're just telling yourself that negative self-talk loop. Oh,
Yeah,
so many
exactly right.
gems here. You feel like our brain almost goes, because the brain, likes constant, it likes familiarity, that
Mm,
it's, like, not working against us, but kind of like it likes that path of least resistance, and now we're all of a
mm.
sudden we're mixing it up and making it do something where it's like, "Well, this is way easier to just keep doing."
Yeah, it's true. But and again, it comes back to environment. If we have an environment that sets us up for success, that can still be the path of least resistance that we do. Most of the time, it doesn't work like that though, because say you want to exercise, that takes effort to get into your activewear and go out the door and hit the gym. Like it takes time and energy and effort. Whereas
Yeah.
just laying in bed and scrolling on your phone takes no effort. It's definitely the path of least resistance. But that's where we come back to our values. Like, what do we care more about? What if I keep laying in bed and scrolling on my phone? What's the outcome in a year and 3 years and 10 years compared to if I get up and do a workout? What's the outcome of that? And what do I care more about? And yeah, change is hard. Change takes effort, but the
Yeah.
effort is always worth it.
I could
I
talk to you all day.
I know. I
This
just
is
Oh.
like this is so good. I literally just had a conversation right before this with a one-on-one client, and she said we were talking about her weight loss journey, and she said, "Haley, the time's gonna pass anyways. So either
Mm,
in 10 weeks, I'm at a different spot, or in
Mhm.
10 weeks, I'm in the same spot. Time's happening
mm,
anyways." And I don't know why that
yeah.
hit me. I was just like,
It's so
"Yeah,
true, though. Yeah. And look, there are little things we can do that make it much easier for us. So, research shows if we've got our fruit and veggies cut up in the fridge in clear containers that we can visibly see, where
mhm,
we double our chances of actually eating it compared to if the fruit or veggies are whole and they're just sitting there. Again, path of least resistance. So, meal prepping can really be beneficial. And I'm sure it's something that you talk about with your people. Even if it's prepping 2 days in advance, when those
yeah,
moments when you're tired and gosh, it's so much easier to grab cheese and crackers than it is to make like a salad or something.
Yeah.
But this, if the salad's already made, easy. That is going to be just as easy as anything else.
So
so this
constantly setting ourselves up for success in these
Exactly.
situations. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of that pre-planning. This is funny. So when I was in college, me and my roommate would always say we were going to the gym in the morning, and we never would. And so we started sleeping in our workout clothes, like, the night before.
Yeah. Love
So
it.
it's just like but, I mean, kind of planning out your day and maybe, like, setting the alarm, pre-booking the Pilates class. You've already paid for it,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
you're committed.
Yeah.
Those things, like, will help, right?
Absolutely. I go to a Pilates class where you can't cancel it 2 hours like before the class. So within that 2-hour window, you can't cancel it. And if
Oh,
you cancel or don't show up, you have to pay for the class again. And I'm like, I just can't let myself do that. So, but it is amazing accountability because I tell you, I've never missed a class.
yes.
So they're actually doing you a favor by
They
implementing
are.
that rule.
Yes, and I know that I visited a friend in Amsterdam and I went to the gym there while I was there, and they've got this membership model where you pay a really high fee per month. And then every time you attend the gym, they take money off your bill for the next month. And so the more you train, the less cost it is for you. And it's brilliant.
That is genius.
Isn't
I'm doing
Honestly,
it?
that with the gym I'm opening. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Wait,
It's
I have a
brilliant.
question. Is running late a habit or a behavior?
Well, it depends how often it happens. Are you asking for a friend, Laura?
Totally,
We're always
yes.
asking for a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be a variety of things. If it's happening consistently, then it could be a habit, or it could also be like something else. It could be a neurobiology thing. Like I know people with ADHD often are late to things. People with they call it sanguine personality, so they're just like more like life of the party type personalities, and there's a whole lot more in that, can be late to things because they're not as mindful of time. They're sort of not conscious of time. Why?
Yeah,
What would you say is your trigger?
I know that's what I was actually thinking, and I'm
Mm,
not I used to be really bad, and I think it was just the time in my life, but anyway, I do feel like there are people that run late and there are
yeah.
people that aren't, but having this conversation with you is making me think about all of these different things that I
Mm.
do or that other people do, and just, okay, is that a habit? Is that a behavior? Can you change that? And I remember joking with my dad, and I was like, "Listen, I came out of the womb this way. Like, I probably came out late, you know? I mean, I was like, that's just how I am." But it's funny because 'cause I'm not late to everything.
Yeah.
I'm punctual but I do it made me think, I'm like, "So is running late, is that a habit or is that"
I think it's a behavior because I've got friends who run late to so many things, but they're always on time for work or like a doctor's
Yeah.
appointment. So it's like, no, you are capable and you're aware. It's just that maybe you don't place as much value on those other,
Yes.
not as
Yeah.
important things.
As
Yeah.
we
That
were just talking about that, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, it's" and I think too, we always think we have more time. I think
Yeah.
Haley and I are both guilty of, "I can get this
all
2
the
more
time.
things done for sure."
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
it's like honking, "Why are these people going so slow? Now I'm gonna be late."
It's everyone else's fault. Yeah. Whereas you've
Yeah,
lived to the last minute. I'm exactly the same.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that is so funny. I
Yes.
just I don't know, I think that your work in life must be so rewarding because you really are making such a huge impact in people's lives.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
think
it
incredible.
is by far the most fulfilling thing that I have ever done. And, there are only two habit researchers in Australia and maybe 10 in the whole world. So it's such an honor to be someone who actually does the research and can translate it and inject compassion into it and, and share it with the world. And it is the most fulfilling thing. And I absolutely adore it. So thank you so much for saying that.
I
Well, we're
mean
obsessed with you.
it.
Do you outside of getting the book, so your book, The Habit Revolution, can be found purchased Audible, I know that's where I purchased it, any
Mhm.
major, like Amazon, any local bookstore for
Yeah.
most people.
Mm.
But do you do one-on-one consultations, or are you too busy for that now? What does that look like if someone wanted to work with you? Do you work
Yeah.
with one-on-one?
Yeah. I don't do one-on-one anymore, but I have trained a whole heap of amazing, advanced, certified habit practitioners who do one-on-one. So my work is really, I do group coaching. So I do courses for people who want to change their habits. And I also run the Habit Change Institute, which is all about training the trainers to be certified habit practitioners. So that's mainly what I do. I do a lot of corporate speaking. So you'll see me on Instagram gallivanting around the world giving keynote presentations, and I love doing that. And I also write programs for companies. So things like organizational habits and helping them with productivity. So I can write a curated program for someone, but I don't do one-on-one anymore.
Okay, that's just good to know. So
Oh, yeah.
people,
Yeah.
if you wanna work with Dr. Cleo, you gotta buy the book.
You
Or
gotta buy the book.
go to her website and go to one of
Yeah.
the people that she's trained because,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
it's very needed. It's very
Yeah,
needed.
it is. Or sign up to one of the courses, because I deliver them live, and so you get to connect. I get to connect with people that way.
Oh, so
Oh my
amazing.
gosh.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating. Laura and I have been talking about it
Yeah.
all day, how excited we are
Oh,
Like, I am
for
so
you're the
happy.
best. And thank you to you. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I've loved chatting with you guys. Thank you.
No,
Yes, I
thank
hope to
you.
have you on again, and hopefully one
Yeah.
day our paths will cross, but thank you so much
Yes.
for your time, and we hope that you have continued success with your book and all of your trainings, and we will keep up to date with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and look forward to having you in Australia sometime soon.
Yeah,
Yes.
we would love that. Thank you, take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.
Until next time.